Hello YouTube, this is umills03. In the previous video, in the previous lesson, in lesson 20, we talked about static methods and we said, well, eventually it's going to be helpful for us to be able to move out of the main method so that we can create our own modular functionality. We can create our own basically sets of code that accomplish particular tasks, and that can simplify our lives and sort of make our lives easier and make our code more compact. And so what we did was we double clicked on our class here, and this is just all my code from the previous video, so I'd invite you to go take a look at this. But we saw a couple of things here. So we saw, first of all, that we can create static methods below the main method but still call them in the main method, so that's fine. That's what we did here. What is even number letters of house? We have to look down and see what exactly that does, and that's defined all the way down here. We have different return types. So the even number letters might return a Boolean, but it could also return an int. Maybe it could return a double. Maybe it could return a string. Maybe it returns nothing at all. So we're going to talk about that in this video. We're going to talk more about return types. And then we're going to talk about overloaded methods. So this idea that you could actually have two completely different methods that share the same name. The only difference is, the distinction really to be made about which one to use is the set of inputs that are being passed into them. So let's try to just start scratch here. So what we're going to do is create another type of function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function that returns an int array. It's going to return an int array. So what it does is it's going to have the return type of int array, and I encourage you to go back to previous videos to learn about how int arrays work if you're so inclined. But what you're going to say is you're going to say set first val of int size and int t. Okay, here's what it's going to do. It's going to create an int array of size given by this first size parameter, and then it's just going to change the first value of the array to whatever t is. So we talked about with initial values in an array, if you're talking about an empty default int array, they all start as zeros, but this t here would allow you to make the first value in the array, the one at index position 0, be something else. So what you're going to say is you're going to say int result equals new int of size. Okay, so whatever the parameter is for the length of this array to be created. Okay, because this method returns an int array. So now what you're going to do is you could say something like result of 0 is t. Okay, so you're going to just reset the first index position, the value at the first index position, to be whatever t is passed in, and then you can just return result. Okay, so let's see what exactly that looks like. So we're going to say public static void main string args. Okay, and I think I said once that it doesn't actually matter the order of the name of your array and whether you do square brackets. So you could have also said int result square brackets, right? You could also write it like this, but the order actually doesn't matter. And so what you're going to do now is what you would do is you would say int w, so you're going to create an int array, let's call it w, and you're going to set it equal to the result of this function up here. So you would say set first val, and then set a size for that int array. So it's going to be basically an empty int array of size 5, but I want to adjust the first value to be 82. And then what we could do is we could say something like for int z and w, I want you to print each of the integers in w, or I want you to print each of the integers in w. So we're going to say system.out.println of z. And what should we get? We should get 820000. So now if we compile it and close and then run it, that's exactly what we get. And this really just connects a lot of the fundamentals that we've been talking about. You get an array, it literally returns an int array. So that's just another example from the previous video. And you can have any set of inputs that you want. So now what we do, now let's go ahead and let's return a string. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say string, let's do g. We're going to call this function g. So the function g is going to return a string. The question is, what does g need to have? So what it's going to do, let's say it accepts a Boolean and a character, and we're just going to arbitrarily call them a and f. And remember, you don't have to use all of, you don't even have to use all of these, you don't even have to use all of these inputs. So what you could do is you could say, if A, return happy. Otherwise, return, sad, okay? So this function returns a string. It either returns this string if A is true, or it returns this string if A is false. So here it doesn't matter what character you put in here. You know, you could do the $sign, you could do a lowercase y, you could do a space, but it only depends on the Boolean being passed in here. So let's do another example. So now what we could do is another example here. So now I'm going to change the main method. So now I'm not going to be testing this set first val method. I'm going to test this G method instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say string word equals G of 3 equals 5. And then how about the character space? Character space. And you don't even have to explicitly convert it to a character because it's already a character, right? It would be like converting an int to an int, right? So anyway, let me just make it a space. So you can see the space here, that's a character, okay? And then what if we want to get the length of this word.length? So then what would this be? So it says G of, and then it accepts a Boolean and a character. So the Boolean here is false, so we should be getting a length of 3. We should be getting a length of 3 here. So now if we go ahead and press compile and close, and then we run it, that's exactly what we get, because the result of G is sad and we wanted the length of it. We can have something called a void. So basically what void means is that not all functions have to return something. So right here, what we're doing is we're setting the output of this function equal to a variable. We're saying set word equal to the output of G. But what if we want to have a function that just accomplishes a task? What if we want to have a function that just does something? It just prints something, but it doesn't return anything, okay? It doesn't set a variable. It just maybe prints something. So here's what I mean by that. What you would have is a return type of void. So what you would do is you would say public static int void f of string t. And then what you could do is you could say system.out.println of t. So what does this function do? Does it return anything? No. What it does is it accepts a string and it literally just prints that string. So now, instead of saying system.out.println, you can just say f. You can just say f, because now when you call f, this code runs instead. Okay, so you would say f of hey. Let's try f of hey. So this is not equal, this is not a string. F of hey is not equal to a word. F of hey is an action. We say f of hey. It's not equal to it's not equal to an object or to an item. It's an action. It's f of hey. So go do f of hey. And now let's see what happens when we run f of hey. So now, if we go ahead and run that, it prints hey. So this doesn't return anything. It just accomplishes a task. So if you try saying something like string x equals f of a, it would say f of a is not a string, okay? If you want to make it a string, what you would do is you would change f to a string, and then instead of printing the string, you would just return the string. So you would just say return t, right? Accepts the string and just gives it right back. It's kind of a silly function, right? You accept the string, you just return it back. There's really no reason why you would do something like that. It's really pretty trivial here. But now what you would do is you would say system.out.println of f of hey. So now f returns a string, but a string doesn't print a string. Like having a string, that's just an object, okay? In order to get it to print on the console, you have to print it, okay? So the question is, so the void thing doesn't do anything. So we don't set main of string args equal to something. We just run main. It doesn't return anything. It just prints. It just does this line of code. Well, what does this line of code do? Well, it prints f of hey. Well, what's f of hey? It's a string. How is that string defined? It's just whatever the string was that's passed in. So if you pass in hey, you get hey. Okay, what if you did t plus t here? Is this adding t together? So could you pass in 5 and get 10? No, this is a concatenation. So here, if we're accepting a string t, then T plus T is taken to mean concatenation. So this would return, hey, hey. So now if you go ahead and compile it and close it and go ahead and run it, it will be, hey, hey. So that's an example of a void method. A void method doesn't return anything, it just does something. We can have another example here. Public static void do something of int x and int y, okay? And then what you could do is you could say for in r equals 0, r is less than x plus y, r plus equals 1, system.out.println of new line or something like that. So what this does is it adds x and y and it prints it prints new line that many times, okay? But it doesn't return anything. This is it. That code is just it's not giving you the string representation of the new line, new line, new line, new line. It's actually completing that task. So it looks like we actually accidentally deleted our main method. But now what we would do is we would say do something of 5 and 5. So now we should expect it to say new line, 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 new line. So we get 10 of those. So that's essentially the working of a void method. It doesn't return anything. It just does something. But of course you can have methods that return, but the data types have to agree. You could have an array of Booleans. Think about an array of Booleans, right? And what if you have F, right? And what if it accepts an array of Booleans? What if it accepts 3 arrays of Booleans, right? It's just three lists of Boolean, true, false values. And so the way that F works is it just returns Z. So that's totally fine. So this is not a void method, but it accepts 3 Booleans and it just returns the third one, right? And so you'd have to make sure that the data types agreed. And so you'd have to make sure that the data types agreed. So you would have basically Boolean T equals new Boolean. And we said that Booleans by default, a Boolean array will by default have false values, right? So this would be like 6 falses, right? And then you could say something like Boolean U equals F of T, T, and T. Does that make sense? You can feed in all 3 of the same Boolean for these 3 inputs, and then you would just get T right out of it. So hopefully you can understand that this data type, Boolean, an array of Booleans, matches up with the return type of the function that we're setting it equal to. If the return type is void, don't set it equal to anything, just run that code, like do something of 5, 5. That's a void method. That's why we don't set it equal to set anything, or we don't print do something. The do something does the printing because it's a void method. The last thing that we need to talk about is overloaded methods. And that's basically when you can have multiple methods that have the same name, and the only way to distinguish them is by the inputs. Okay, so if you say public static void F of int R, okay, and what would this do? This would say system.out.println of R plus 1. Public static int F of int S and int T return S plus T minus 1. Okay, so now let's try this out. There are a couple of differences and there are a couple of similarities here. Well, what are the similarities? Let's think about the similarities and differences. Similarities. So similarities, they're both static methods called F. They both accept ints, okay? The difference is that one accepts an int, the other accepts an int and an int, okay? And the order matters, okay? So if you accept an int in a string, that would be a different overloaded method than if you accepted a string and then an int, okay? So the order that you pass arguments into a function certainly matters, okay? So then we do but then the difference is, so they accept different things. Obviously they have different rules. And so different rules, and by one of the things I mean by that is that one of them one prints something, the other returns an integer, okay? So the other one, so one of them, you just run f of 6, right? And it prints 7. The other one, you set f of two numbers equal to an integer, and then it's up to you whether or not you want to print that integer or not. But this is not a print. It just returns a number. It says this is the number, this is the output. Okay, so now here's what, so now you can just kind of test these things out. So what you could do is you say f of 5, right? This standalone because the first f is a void method, not, so don't set it equal to anything, just run it. And so what would if we call f of 5, what do we get? Well, it would print 6. Okay, but for this method down here, it's not good enough to just say f of 2 and 3, okay? Because this wouldn't stand alone. It wouldn't print anything, right? It wouldn't print anything. So essentially, if you go to close here, and then you go to void main, it only prints 6, right? You can say, oh, f of 2, 3, but you're not doing anything with this. So now you need to close it up. Once you evaluate it, once you get that integer, now you can say system.out.println f of 2, 3, and then it's able to go ahead and evaluate that, and you get 4 because 6 because 2 plus 3 minus 1 is 4. So overloaded methods, you have completely different functionality, right? And it could be the same return type too. You could say public static int f. What if you said, int s, int t, and then what a Boolean? What if you tack on a Boolean? Well, now maybe it doesn't even matter what the Boolean is. So s minus t minus 1. So here it's just a sort of a fundamentally different rule regardless of what z is. But if you pass in a Boolean, regardless of what it is, you get a different rule. So if you do, let's do ln. So if you do ln of f of 2, 3 false, you should get the same thing as if you do f of 2, 3 true, but both of those two calls should be different from the one before it. So now if you close it and you run it, you get the 6, 4, -2, -2. So these are examples of overloaded methods. And so hopefully between this video and the previous one, you've learned to understand that the order of methods doesn't matter. You can do the main method and then define the functions. That's totally okay. You can pass different collections of inputs into a method. The last thing I'll say in this video, the last thing I should say, is that you don't even need inputs for a method. So you could say public static double u, return 5.0. So what does this do? This method accepts no inputs at all. It literally just returns the number 5.0. And that's totally legitimate, right? That's totally fine. So now if you said something like int z equals int of u, it just calls this u function and there's nothing to input into it, and that's totally fine. So now here z would be 5, right? Just literally the integer 5, because we are explicitly casting the output of u to an integer, and here we get that positive 5 there. So we learned about different collections of inputs that you can have into a function. We learned that you can have overloaded methods. We learned that you can have different return types. You can return an int, double, string, Boolean, character, array of ints, array of doubles, array of strings, array of Booleans, array of characters, or a void. So that's like 11 options right there. And you can just sort of, you need to specify what it is that you're going to be returning. And if you have a void method, more often than not, instead of returning something, you're just going to be doing the printing right there and then, rather than setting the output of that function equal to another variable. So hopefully you see the distinctions there. Feel free to rewind this and practice. Try making 10 or 12 or 10 or 20 or 30 functions of your own. It's really kind of a lot of fun to have all this autonomy. And then in the next video, we'll go on to object-oriented fundamentals and continue to move into more advanced topics. So from UMills03, thanks for watching and please subscribe.